Now, let me introduce our analysts. On the left, here is Solomon Jones. Solomon is an author and award-winning columnist whose work appears weekly in the Philadelphia Daily News. He also has a blog called The Philadelphia Experiment on newsworks.org. And to his right is Emaleigh Doley. She is a communications professional, community organizer, and a producer at TedXPhiladelphia, which is coming up this June. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Well, let's get started. The most important thing, or the biggest thing that happened tonight, was that Lynne Abraham collapsed at the beginning of the debate. What does this do for her chances? What does this mean?
I think, you know, the first question that I asked Lynne Abraham when I interviewed her at my other job at 900 AM WURD, where I'm the morning host, was about her age. I asked her if she felt that her age was an impediment. And of course, we all feel and hope that she's going to be all right after collapsing this evening. But I think that it underscores her age. She is in her 70s. She corrected me. I said she was 77. She said, no, I'm not. I'm 73 or 74. I forget which one. But it really underscores that for her. I think that the people who are going to support her are still going to support her because they see her as a law and order candidate. But I think that her age is going to be a problem for some voters, and her health issue tonight, I think, underscored that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we do know she's 74. We know we're not sure exactly what happened tonight. She was not feeling earlier in the day. But when you're looking at young voters, which are a big part of this race or getting a lot of talk about in this race, what does that really mean when they see someone who is in their 70s versus someone like Doug Oliver who's in their 40s?
Right, right.
I mean, I think if we want to take a step back from that, we all know that how you appear in public, in particular in TV appearances, if we just want to take it way back and think about the Nixon debate, in which he completely changed hue and turned horrible, that did him in. And in many ways, I think, unfortunately, that is what's going to happen to Lynne Abraham now, because, as Solomon said, age has been a concern all along. But at the same time, if we just want to flip the perspective a bit, she could have been maybe any age, and this might do her in, just because she's a woman, and women can't really show weakness in politics.
Sure, and we're showing the tape of what happened. We know a couple people got to the debate late. It happened very early on in the debate, and we saw that Senator Williams was in the middle of speaking, and he did go right over to aid her, as well as some of the other candidates. So obviously, we wish her the best, and we hope that she can continue on. We haven't heard anything from the Abraham camp yet, so we're not sure. But that aside, what was the most surprising thing that you heard tonight?
I really didn't hear anything that surprised me. I've interviewed all of these candidates except for Milton Street, still trying to track him down. But I didn't hear anything really that surprised me. I think that the thing that was a little bit different, I think, was Senator Tony Williams kind of positioning himself as a front runner in terms of the way that he was carrying himself. When Len Abraham fell out, before he continued to speak, he talked about Len Abraham and said that, we wish her the best, et cetera, and really seemed a little more human, a little more concerned than he has in some other venues. The other thing that he did, which I thought was interesting, was to come to Milton Street's defense. Milton Street served in the same body that he did in the Pennsylvania legislature, and Tony Williams talked about the fact that, hey, he paid his debt to society. We have a lot of people in our community who are like that, who have paid their debt to society, and isn't it such an inspiring story that he paid that debt and is now running for mayor? That's not something to be frowned upon. That's something to be admired. And so I think he was kind of positioning himself as this conciliatory front runner, which I found interesting.
Well, I actually want to bring up something that somebody said. Milton Street is seen by a lot of people as just some candidate who just says crazy things. He gets up there and says no and yells no and does all kinds of stuff. Moody Rudiger said here that Milton Street is dead weight on the stage, and in this race he's taking up valuable time to assess other candidates. Emaleigh, would you agree with what Solomon said, and do you think that maybe he showed a little, I don't want to say remorse, but said what he said about Milton because he thinks that he just is not a real competition for him?
I don't know if that's the answer per se. I actually think that a lot of people are going to identify with some of the statements that Milton Street made tonight, even if they seemed kind of bombastic or empty. I mean, he talked a lot about how he has a plan but did not elaborate much on any of the plans. But he is talking about issues that are of real concern to at least half or more of Philadelphia's population, issues about crime and safety and jobs in our communities. So I actually think that Milton Street did a little bit better. It just is going to depend on who you ask.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of his idea of community policing? He actually talked about auxiliary police, which New York has, and this idea of community policing in a different way, I guess, than the rest of the candidates did and what Commissioner Ramsey's doing now. All the candidates were asked yes or no, not all of them answered yes or no, but asked yes or no whether or not they would keep Commissioner Ramsey, and Milton was the only one who said that he would not. Do you think that crime is a real deterrent here, like some of the candidates said, for bringing jobs to the city and changing it for the future?
I think that crime is definitely an issue. Crime is always an issue. It's important, though, to note that education is the #1 issue in terms of what the voters have said. In some polls, I know Pew did a poll where they talked about education being the #1 issue for people. And I think the candidate who's going to do well is the candidate who can connect education to crime. I saw Doug Oliver do that a little bit. I saw some of the other candidates do that a little bit. But I also think, to go back just a little bit, you can't count Milton Street out as somebody who does not matter. I think that when you see a candidate say to another candidate, well, you know, his ideas matter, his ideas are important, he's kind of co-opting that candidate's ideas and trying to co-opt some of that candidate's audience. There are about 300,000 people in Philadelphia walking around with criminal records. So when Tony Williams is talking to Milton Street and talking about Milton Street's criminal record and talking about other people picking themselves up like Milton Street did, he's not talking to Milton Street. He's talking to those 300,000 people, many of whom can vote.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about education. It's the biggest issue. It's been the biggest issue in the city of Philadelphia for the past 2-3 years now. A lot of varying opinions in some ways, some out there a little bit. Doug Oliver talked about the whole idea of this farm society and the idea that kids should be in school longer. Anthony Williams went a little bit further. As Victoria pointed out, Williams wanted to add 2 years to high school experience to make it a 6-year high school. We talked about this a little bit, Solomon, when we were doing the Great Schools project with Access Philly. You know, will it work? Will people buy into that? Would the citizens of Philadelphia really think that that's a good idea?
I think that people will buy into anything at this point to save the schools and make them better. I think when you know that there's a whole block-long cache of books in the basement of the school district of Philadelphia, outrageous. You know, when you know that there are 23 school buildings that have closed, mostly in poor minority neighborhoods, when you know that there are schools that don't have librarians, don't have paper, don't have supplies, I think people will buy into anything that they think is practical and will work. So that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and Emaleigh, you know, a lot of talk around the funding aspect of schools. Bars open past 2 a.m., which would be good with millennials, you know, or even people in their 40s and 50s and 60s who'd like to see Philadelphia kind of go more in a more New York sense of mind when it comes to that. But nobody agreed with Mayor Nutter's idea of raising the taxes to 9.5%. Everyone either didn't agree or didn't always outline their thoughts on what they should do with it. When it comes to looking to the future here, do you think that any of them has a real plan?
I mean, I think that it's funny because people are so resistant to having taxes raised, but if you actually do the math, I believe that tax hike would only equal about $150 extra per year if we're talking about the tax on residences, which is a small amount if we're talking about educating the entire city. So don't count me as being correct on that math, but what it ends up being per individual is actually not that much if we're talking about the health and growth and education of all of Philadelphia, and that is really what we need. As Solomon said, we need to connect those dots. So if we're talking about crime, well, if we don't do anything to improve education, that is actually one way where we can lower crime. So having that kind of multi-pronged approach is incredibly important. So I get it. Nobody wants to pay more taxes, but I would pay more taxes.
And you represent the younger side of the coin, educated. You look at parts of Philadelphia where people are just struggling to make ends meet, and Nelson Diaz talked about growing up in the projects. And for some people, $150 is a lot of money.
Right.
Now, a year.
A year. But in the grand scheme of things, it's something for their kids.
I mean, so I might represent an educated sector of the city. I'm 31. I graduated from college, but I live in my childhood neighborhood of Germantown on a very low income block where half the block is in deep poverty. So my experience of the city as a quote unquote millennial is very different from how I start my morning to where I go in the day and then where I lay my head at night. So I feel like I can understand what people refer to as Philadelphia is kind of two cities in one to a certain extent. And just in terms of spending more money or being taxed more, what I find that young people really want to know is that their dollars are being well spent. We want to know that our government is being accountable, that money isn't being wasted, that we are being strategic in plans, and that's across the board. It's not just in education.
Now, we've been listening to what people were saying. We were collecting tweets, those of you at home who were tweeting during the debate. And I saw a number of people, and it's easy to be cynical on social media, especially on Twitter, but a number of people just were really frustrated, it seems, that they weren't getting answers to the questions. It is the first debate of the primary season of the mayor's race itself, televised debate. So House says that it's astounding to watch the slop that is actually running for mayor of Philadelphia. The city has been paralyzed for years. The Daily News ran an op-ed that said that there wasn't a lot of inspiration in the set of candidates that were out there. Solomon, are people frustrated? Do you feel like there's somebody who's really going to come in and just guide the city into the future, that everybody's hoping that it's going to happen?
Well, it's funny because I think that's one of the messages that Nelson Diaz has kind of seized on. If you notice, he positioned himself very much as an outsider, which I find interesting for a guy who was city solicitor, for a guy who was a judge, for a guy who has held elected office and has been in appointed positions before. But he's positioning himself as an outsider and as somebody who has a long history of working on behalf of Philadelphia as a private citizen. So he's trying to separate himself from these other folks who for the most part, are career politicians. And I think that it's an interesting ploy. I wonder if it's a ploy that's going to work. But I think that in terms of passion, as much as we want to talk about Milton Street brings some passion. And he brings a little bit of a break from the consistent messaging that the other candidates bring. You hear Tony Williams keep talking about the status quo. Well, you're in the state senate, you're part of it. So it's interesting to see. I don't know that anybody's going to jump out. I don't know that anybody has that kind of personality to jump out. But I think that in the age of social media, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody, if they can seize on the right message, can jump out in that way.
Well, let's talk about social media. Jim Kenney was posed the question. He's been prolific on Twitter in terms of city politics for a long time. When he started and announced his candidacy for mayor, they took his Twitter account away from him, his campaign. He was asked tonight about it, and he called Twitter a bunch of nonsense, basically. He's not trying to say the State of the Union address on there. But did that show that he is the real person who he is inside, that was toned down for this race?
I think that Kenney and the public deserved a bit of a tougher question. He only had that one individual question, and his was about social media use. But Jim Kenney has kind of turned himself around on Twitter, I think, after facing some criticisms. But at the end of the day, if we're going to judge our next mayor on what they tweet about, there are bigger issues.
Oh, this is true. This is true. His campaign was tweeting the entire debate itself.
Yes.
I didn't see a lot of tweeting from any of the other campaigns. Maybe some chiefs of staff or little tweets here and there. But what does this say for the future of running? So we have this race now, but let's look ahead. Can it really have that impact if there's a lot of talk about those millennials that are going to be the future of the city?
Yeah.
Well, I think that you do have to maintain an online presence. Just hands down, you must have a digital presence in this day and age. But at the same time, I don't think that one tweet should necessarily do a person in, which we have seen happen to regular people and politicians and professional athletes and superstars as well. I think we're judging it a little too much if you think about some of the things that I myself might tweet about.
Sure.
Yeah. I think that, I think it's twofold. When you look at it from a political standpoint. Now, politically, I think the Obama campaign showed that you could use email in ways that people hadn't imagined that you could use email before. You could use email to mobilize people. You could use email to raise money. You could use email to get volunteers. And I think in the same way that he was able to seize on email, I think that you will find the winning candidate in this race will be able to seize on social media in the same way, to raise money, to mobilize people and to get volunteers. So I think that it's going to be a key, because right now what you see is social media creating the news rather than social media reacting to the news.
And candidates who are actually engaging with the public and answering questions on Twitter, I mean, that's automatically an edge up. I remember about a month ago, I attended a mayoral forum, and one of the questions to Kenny was, everyone had to reveal a surprise, and he said, well, believe it or not, I love to read poetry. But he didn't answer who his favorite poets were, and I just tweeted him after the event, and he got right back. And it was, one of them was Langston Hughes, and I'm forgetting the second.
Jim Kenney's favorite poet is Langston Hughes.
He's got two.
Yeah, okay.
He's got two. One, it was yeah. Woo. Well, but he answered, and that said something to me.
Yeah, I think Jim Kenney is really trying to reach out to the African American community.
Got those
yes.
He's trying. He's absolutely trying to reach out to the African American community. You know, some of my experience was in city council. I worked in city council for a couple of years. Kind of watched Jim Kenney. Never saw any of that when I was there working under Councilman Good. And so I find it very interesting that during this time when he's running for mayor, he seems to be seeking an entirely different relationship with the African American community than he's had in the past. And I think that is very calculated, and I think that if he can pull it off, then he's going to be a formidable candidate. But he's going to have to answer for, in my view, a history where he hasn't really done that before.
Sure. And there was a lot of talk about the tale of two cities. A lot of people who live in this city, whether they're living in North Philly or they're living in Center City or different parts of Center City that are now becoming gentrified, there's just a ton of talk about this new versus old idea. Milton Street, he went, drew the lines, Vine Street Expressway down, river to river, that kind of idea. Is that going to be a big part of this election?
It should be.
Yeah.
I think.
But will it be, though? Is the real question.
It should be.
Yeah.
When you talk about poverty, it's not really a winning message. I worked on Congressman Fattah's campaign when he ran for mayor. It was all about poverty. It was not a message that caught fire. It was an important message. And poverty has gone up in Philadelphia since then. It was 25% then. I believe it's over 26% now. But I think it needs to be an important message because, again, it ties into all of the social ills that we're talking about. When Milton Street talks about unemployment in my community, right? When he says, in my community, there are about 5,000 people that needs jobs, he's talking about two cities. He's talking about a Philadelphia that is impoverished because people don't have the education that they need and they can't get jobs. And so it's an important message, and I think that it's not going to be a winning message necessarily for him, but I think it's one that the other candidates need to seize on. on to.
Of course. And there's a lot of talk about filling the funding gaps for education using unpaid taxes. Kevin says right here, a lot of talk of unpaid taxes. Do you think that that is a viable option?
Sure, it's a viable option. I think
that it's a realistic option.
No,
maybe not the right
I
word.
think that you know what ends up happening is that nobody nobody's going to say I want to raise taxes, even though I think Emaleigh makes a good point about it not really being that much money. My taxes, if I paid $130 more in taxes a year, which is what mine would be. You know, I could do that. That's what, $10 a month? You know, I can do that. Yeah. You know, it's not going to hurt me. But I think that a politician understands that when you're running, you can't talk about raising taxes. And so you have to figure out other ways to say, okay, well, we need to stop waste, fraud, and abuse. Like, that's one of the favorites.
Yeah. Yep.
You know what I mean? And this is the same type of thing. We need to get unpaid taxes.
Well, when you look at it, though, you have the people who are living, go back to this tale of two cities. You have the young people who are making good money or a lot more money than other people in other parts of the city. And you're trying to get people who are younger to say, yeah, I'll totally pay money. I know friends of mine who say, I'll totally pay more money, pay the $150 to the $12 a month
sure.
That you would need. But, you know, will that work, you know? Will
it work to fund the schools?
Yeah.
I don't know that it's enough. I do know this. Under the Nutter administration, the city has been paying a healthy share of the funding for the schools. I know that under Governor Corbett, the state wasn't paying enough of a share. And I know that Governor Wolf has said, you know, we're going to put $160 million more into schools. All of that is great, but you have to have a dedicated funding source, and frankly, you have to have a dedicated community in order to make schools work better.
It really is a multi-pronged approach. I mean, collecting more taxes is just one part of it. The cigarette tax, for example, that a lot of people were opposed to is another part of it. There are a lot of ways to increase funding. A lot of people say, hey, we need to look to Harrisburg. Why are we trying to
even people in Harrisburg?
Why are we trying to find trying to dig in the pockets of Philadelphia and get some loose change? We know that this is a city with a lot of financial problems. So again, that approach, it really has to be thought about strategically and multi-pronged. And if people aren't, for me, for the next mayor, if I can't tell that someone has a greater vision, is really able to think strategically about issues, then they're not a candidate for me.
And hopefully that is the way that other people think when you're moving forward, trying to bring the city into the future that everybody's hoping that it's going to be.
Right.
I want to circle back to Lynne Abraham. We just got this tweet. She just sent it out from her campaign. Lynne is feeling great, waiting to talk to the press now, so we're glad that she's doing well. How does she come back from this?
You know, she is, and I've had the opportunity to see her and the other candidates in another mayoral forum. In fact, the question that was asked to Doug Oliver was from the Aldea WRD forum that they had when Doug Oliver said, the sad fact is that police have good reason to fear black men. And when you put her next to the other candidates, she sounds very reasonable. She sounds very experienced. You can hear her experience. You can understand the pragmatism of her ideas. And so I think that it does hurt her in underscoring the age factor. But I think that if she can just be who she is in future debates and in future opportunities to line up next to the other candidates, you know, it's not going to be a death knell, I don't think.
I want to go to a poll that we posed to our viewers on social media and on NBC10.com and the NBC10 app. We asked who, after the debate, we posted this, who after the debate would vote for in the primary. And as you can see, 54% are voting for Lynne Abraham. Obviously, she took part in, 5 minutes of the debate? So is this a sympathy vote for her online? You know, this is an unscientific poll here. We're looking at 3% for Nelson Diaz, Jim Kenney 10%, Doug Oliver 18%, Milton Street 10%, and Anthony Hardy-Williams at 5%.
Sounds like a sympathy vote to me.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Or some humor votes in there.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that Kenney only, was it 10%? That Kenney only had 10%. I actually thought he did very well He seemed very prepared and a little bit more perhaps restrained, but it came across professionally well, I thought.
Sure. Now let's talk about jobs. There was questions about the future of jobs. Goes side and side with education. They talked about how do we attract well-educated workforce that can do jobs in technology in the Comcast of the world, who is our parent company. But I think Jim Kenney brought up something that was just very interesting in terms of the idea of getting longshoremen on and doing jobs that are in trades that may necessarily get pushed to the wayside in the campaign. Everybody likes to jump on the bandwagon, it seems, of high-tech jobs, new jobs, science, technology, but there are these trades that can pay $40 an hour, as he said. Is this his partnership with the electricals union?
Well, I mean, look at the people who are backing him. I mean, yeah, he's got to talk about the trades.
Right.
Unfortunately, the trades have been very exclusionary when it comes to women and when it comes to people of color. And so, that's a dangerous, I think, message for him if he is trying to reach beyond that base that is represented in his labor union backers, because those jobs sound great.
Sure.
But are you going to be able to get into that union if you are a woman? Are you going to be able to get into that union if you are black, if you are Latino, if you are Asian? For many, many people over many, many years, the answer has been no. And so, I think he needs to go back to the drawing board and talk about something that might be a little bit more inclusive to the majority of people in Philadelphia.
Well, I mean, the labor unions, they have to change. And there has been a lot of momentum and push around some of the issues that Solomon mentioned, particularly being exclusionary to minorities and African-American population. But at the same time, manufacturing jobs and trade jobs, it's a good job. And the city could use more of them. So the real question for me is, can we make sure that everybody has the opportunity and access to those positions? I don't think that it's something that we should ignore. It gets a little tired hearing, I know I shouldn't say this, but like hearing about the growing tech sector over and over and over and over again. We got to talk about jobs for all different types of Philadelphians.
Yeah. The interesting thing was they talked about, and somebody talked about, and I forget who it was. As a matter of fact, I forget who it was. They talked about training people for the jobs that are actually here. It might have been Tony Williams.
I think it was.
Talking about training people for the jobs that are actually here. And when you talk about manufacturing jobs, they're gone. They're not here. Now, those trades jobs are here, but again, they only go to a certain segment of the population, which is not any longer the majority of the population in Philadelphia. And so the question is, how do you prepare people for the jobs that are here? How do you identify the jobs that are here? And how do you get people actually into the jobs that are here? I didn't hear anybody answer that question today.
Right.
Quickly, while we're on the jobs standpoint, there was a lot of talk about making Philadelphia an energy hub. Some people, talked about the drilling and pipelines and the refineries and everything and such. I think Sabrina brought up a really good point here. Poor air quality and air disproportionately affects Latinos and African Americans in Philadelphia. The refineries are in Grace Ferry, places like that. When we talk about that, at the same time, Philadelphia is trying to be the greenest city in the United States of America. How could you be an energy hub and not just rely on high-tech energy and clean energy?
I thought it was interesting, and I totally disagreed with Milton Street when he was talking about that's not something we can do in 8 years, talking about creating the Philadelphia as an energy hub. The fact of the matter is, and having worked for a congressman, I know this to be true, there's already federal money going into creating Philadelphia as an energy hub. So it's not something that would have to be done only on the city level. It's something that's already begun. Congressman Fattah has already been working on that. There's already money out there for that. And so the issue is, and the question is, how does a mayor capitalize on that? How does a mayor take that money and then leverage it in order to get more money, maybe from private sources, maybe from the state, maybe from nonprofit sources? And I didn't hear anybody answer that either. But I think that the process has already begun.
And at the same time, Sabrina's tweet is one that deserves to be acknowledged because this is an issue that she's raising that is often not brought up when we're talking about Philadelphia as the next energy hub at all.
Sure. So we're almost out of time. I just want to say I've been told in my ear that Lynne Abraham is trending above Rand Paul right now on Twitter in Philadelphia. You know, so
Not
maybe
surprised.
you're not surprised, or you're not surprised. Final thoughts, you know, on how this turned out tonight.
Well, just one comment about Lynne Abraham. I think that she should go home and answer all the questions asked in tonight's debate and get them online.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think that this is a good start. I think that this is like fighters circling each other, trying to fill each other out. I saw a lot of jabs thrown tonight. I didn't see any haymakers, but I think they'll be coming in some debates down the line.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank you, Solomon and Emaleigh. I appreciate it. Our analysts for taking part. You can read more about each of the candidates and where they stand on the issues right now on NBC10.com or through the NBC10 app. We did extensive interviews with them that are available in video form, and they answered 10 questions. Just look for the Decision 2015 section. For all of us here at NBC10, good night and thank you.